Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome here at Crypto Hash Review, and we are continuing our saga or our story about the invention, the creation, and the history of money. We are going to move on to a very important topic here today, which deals with the current state of money. What is money right now? We've discussed money from the very beginnings of time, talking about the purpose of money, what brought about its invention, you could say, in the first place. And we started off from how money began as materials, things that people held as ransom to get back what they were owed. Moving on to metallic forms of debt, using pieces of metal that are more malleable, more fungible than others. And then moving on to paper representations or paper certificates of those pieces of metal, because those pieces of metal had, you could say, intrinsic value, and that's a very odd word, but it's an intrinsic value. So these certificates represented the value that was stored somewhere else. And eventually, you mentioned how that paper eventually decoupled or detached from that stored gold in 1971 to what we have of today. And what we have today is, you could say, what we call fiat money. And it's called fiat because I think the Latin word is let it be. I think the word is let it be. So the idea is that this piece of paper is worth €5. So let it be €5. Fiat, let it be. And these forms of money essentially comes from central banks. Now there is essentially, and it's a very, like I say, less than 1% of all the money in circulation is actually money printed by the government. When we say the government's printing money, it's not actually accurate. What is accurate is that central banks are the ones who issue new currency. They are the ones who print it essentially or digitally create new forms of money, not actually the government, but central banks. And in most countries, as far as I'm aware, definitely in UK and the United States, central banks are private entities. They are private companies separate from the government. So we have this central bank system. We can almost say we live in a central bank system. And what the question here is, why do we need, or why were central banks invented? Why did we move to what's called central banks? And the reason, the best thing to understand this is to look at the reason why. What is their motivation? What did they gain from it, or what do they say we gain from it? I should say. And the issue of central banks, or the motivation for central banks, is essentially to regulate the money supply, i.e., the market sometimes takes a while for prices to adjust to new circumstances. That you could say the market is technically inefficient. Might be certain tragedies like we have right now with COVID-19 and other certain circumstances that will lead one to either need to expand or contract the money supply, i.e., increase the amount of money in existence and decrease the amount of money in existence. If you compare that to the previous systems that we had items, then really and truly there was no money supply in that case. I mean, where you minted gold coins, gold is gold. If you find more gold, you have more money. But there was, so yes, in essence, there was a way to increase the money supply by just finding more gold, but it isn't really a way to decrease the money supply, because you wouldn't really take gold and destroy it. So this, you could say that central bank is an attempt to make the economy more malleable, more manipulated, or in a good way, not in a bad way. No, they're not saying, oh, we want to manipulate it to harm you. I mean, that may be the byproduct, but that's not so necessarily what they're saying to your face that they want to do. So essentially, this is what we have. We have central banks or central bank issued currencies. Now, central banks are not the only ones who issue money. Normal banks also issue money. We're going to discuss that in a bit later on. But the point here is that we want to discuss the issue of central bank issued currency and how does that come about. So money today that we have is of two types: that which fundamentally stems from and comes from the central bank, and that which comes from the normal high street bank. Now, I'm not going to go through the details about this. We will do so on the website, so refer to our website for more details about exactly the mechanics between, or the relationship between the government, the high street banks, the central banks, and the issue of bonds and so on and so forth. But long story short, government needs money. The government might need money, either to spend on building roads, on war, or whatever they need to be. So they need money. So governments would issue what's called a bond. Bond, just from the word bondage, is slavery. It's just basically a certificate to say we will pay you back money. So governments issue monies through bonds, and they promise to pay back interest on those bonds. Long story short, from the moment of the government issuing bonds to the point where the central banks now receive those bonds, we'll go through the stage in between. Now, the central banks will take on these bonds and then they will issue the money to the government. Now, this money that the central banks are giving to the government didn't exist before that bond. So imagine a government wanted a bond of £10, so they'll give this certificate. This bond is worth £10. Here you go. And by the time it gets to the central bank, they say, okay, here you go. Here is £10 for the bond. Now, where did that £10 come from? Nowhere. That's essentially how it works. They literally just type in the screen, press the button, and it's there. It exists. That's how money is issued from the central bank. Governments issue bonds. Central banks take those bonds, give the money to the banks, and ironically, now the government, and by necessity of that, we, as a whole, as a society, now owe the central bank money. We now owe the central bank the money, i.e. the £10 that we just got from that certificate, plus interest. So every time the government goes to the central bank or gets every time the bonds gets to the central bank, essentially that debt now belongs to the central bank. So in essence, when we say the national debt basically means the amount of money the people owe the central bank, plus interest. And this is how it's the first way in which the tool in which they regulate the money supply. So by this issuing of money. And the second way they regulate the money supply, the central banks, is to increase and decrease the money supply, is through interest rates. Now, we're going to discuss interest rates in the second video, but these are the two main tools that the central bank has to, you could say, inflate or deflate the money supply, to increase and decrease the money supply, to create or destroy, in inverted commas, the money supply. I hope you find this video useful, and look forward to seeing you in our next edition where we discuss in detail the second part of money creation in our current day. Please like and subscribe to our channel, join our mailing list on our website, and if you want to give us a call or a shout, refer to our website for that, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.